It's because they know that they've been sold a bill of goods. You know, they're not satisfied with their current state of being. They have a secret unrest that gnaws at their heart because what they've been told isn't sufficiently true. So when I say, well, of course you're suffering, it's like, well, nobody ever told us that. It's like, no, that's the way of the world. And it might get worse before it gets better. Well, people are relieved to hear that just because they know it's true, and they're afraid because no one will say it. You know, in the Harry Potter series, you can't say Voldemort's name, right? It's the same thing. Well, as soon as you admit that your life is going to be brutally difficult from time to time, then at the same time you transcend it. It's like, okay, we got a problem here. Mortality, vulnerability, malevolence. That's a problem. Fine, we've got the resources to deal with it. Well, reading is a minority taste. Listening isn't. Publishers have been absolutely shocked by the magnitude of the increase in audiobook sales over the last few years. It's possible that it's a more powerful technology than print. The majority of people do not have friendly relationships with books, but they're not intimidated by a video and they're not intimidated by a podcast. Well, the first thing to understand is that hardly any men occupy those positions. Okay, so we're talking about a very small minority of people. So first, you have to be smart. Maybe you have to be in the 95th percentile or above in terms of intelligence. That's 1 in 20, right? Okay, then you have to be conscientious, very conscientious. You have to work very, very hard. So maybe you have to be in the 5th percentile or 95th percentile for conscientiousness. Now you're down to 1 in 400. Then you have to be competitive. You have to be low in agreeableness. Then you have to be willing to work 80 hours a week, all the time, non-stop on what you're doing, because otherwise someone else is going to outcompete you. What happens is if you just keep piling on the constraints for occupancy of those positions, you find a smaller and smaller percentage of people who are able or willing to do what they need to do. It's not why doesn't everybody occupy a C-suite position? The question is, why would anybody be willing to do that? Because you have to be completely devoted to it. Now, by that time, they're often married, and they're often married to someone who's making about the same amount of money that they're making. So they're not driven by an economic necessity at that point. Then they're generally willing to take a 9-to-5 job, and then they go have a life. They have kids, they have a family, they have some spare time, they do other things. And they're thinking, I don't want to spend 80 hours a week competing with a bunch of hyper-competitive men. And the answer is, well, there's a small subset of men who are temperamentally inclined to do that. If you, didn't matter wherever you put those guys, all they would do is work. Anything you suppress comes back with a vengeance. And if you want to make men radically dangerous, then you make them weak. So anything to make them weak is going to make them dangerous, because weak men are dangerous. So, you know, people who are afraid of men think that strong men are dangerous because they identify strength with arbitrary power. But that's a very primitive definition of strength. So, and if you remove competitiveness and you forbid aggressiveness, like at my kids' school, they couldn't pick up snow so that they integrate their aggression into their personalities. You suppress all the opportunity for the integration of aggression through play, then there's no integration. The aggression isn't going to go away. So it'll come back. It'll come back to haunt you. Make a plan. Do something worthwhile in the world because it suffers in your absence. That's why. Is that there's something you could be. There's something you could bring into the world that would be useful for you and everyone else. And if you don't bring that into the world, something else takes its place and it's not good. And that's on you.
Mm-hmm. Which is exactly the opposite that they get taught at school.
It's about as close to the opposite as you can get, yes.